All right, welcome everyone. My name is Mark Wu. I'm the director of the Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies. On behalf of my fellow directors for both the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies as well as for the Korea Institute, welcome to all of you for today's exciting discussion, 3 years in Prospects for Peace, an examination of the China-Russia-North Korea relations. As many of you know, we have each year had an event co-organized by the Fairbank Center and the Davis Center touching on the nature and examination of the China-Russia relationship. That relationship was very much called into sharp focus as a result of the conflict in Ukraine. And so we've had this event to coincide with the rough anniversary, rough timing of that each year. So this is the third installment of that conversation. This year we decided, because of the introduction of North Korean troops into the theater, to actually invite our colleagues from the Korea Institute to join as part of this discussion as well. And so this year our focus has expanded to look not just at the China-Russia relationship, but also both of their relationships with North Korea. And I can't think of a more distinguished panel to have here with me to speak on this matter. So I'm just going to introduce my panelists in a very quick succession down the row here. To my immediate left, to your right, is Professor Andrew Erickson. He is a professor at the U.S. Naval War College, where he established the China Maritime Studies Institute and served as its research director. He is also currently a visiting scholar here at the Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies. So please take advantage of his time here at Harvard to tap into his expertise. To his immediate left, on your right, is Professor Emily Holland. Emily is an assistant professor at the U.S. Naval War College, where she's affiliated with the Russia Maritime Studies Institute. She's just returning back to the U.S. Naval War College after having spent some time at NATO. She is the author of a forthcoming book on European energy security, and she is well known to some of you here as well because she's a former postdoctoral fellow here at the Davis Center. Next is Professor Vitaly Kozyrev. He is the Distinguished Professor of Political Science and International Studies at Endicott College. He is also an Associate in Research at the Fairbank Center, and his specialization is in international relations and foreign policy in Eurasia. He's written widely and taught widely, including previously at Amherst, Yale, and at the University of Delaware. And last but not least is Dr. Seong-hyon Lee, who is a visiting scholar here with us this year at the Harvard University Asia Center. He's also been a visiting scholar previously at the Fairbank Center. He is a senior fellow at the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. He is a specialist in many areas of East Asian regional security, but particularly with a focus on the PRC and the DPRK. And he has previously held academic appointments at Yonsei University in South Korea, as well as in Kyushu University in Japan. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel here today. And our format today is we're going to basically have an open conversation for the first 45 minutes or so, and then we will open this up for questions from the audience. So I'm just going to kick off our conversation by asking you to sort of reflect upon the state of China-Russia relations. How would you describe that? We've heard some of you describe this previously. But is there anything that's emerged in the last year that would cause you to describe the nature of that relationship to be any different than how you understood it a year ago? And maybe, Dr. Erickson, if I ask you to sort of start?
Thank you. Great to be here to discuss these important and timely issues. I should emphasize that these are solely my personal views and don't represent any institution with which I am or have been affiliated. And that's especially the case because I'm quite jet lagged from returning over the weekend from a trip in Vietnam. The positive side of the jet lag is I did have a lot of time to read on the plane. And for anyone who has not already read Ambassador Dr. Kevin Rudd's book on Xi Jinping, I highly recommend it. I think Dr. Rudd has called the situation right through his extensive research, which involved reading all manner of official party documents and Xi Jinping speeches. What emerges is the same leader that I see leading the PRC, a powerful, determined leader who sincerely believes very strongly in Marxist ideology and a strong Leninist party system, who has moved significantly beyond the legacy of his post-Mao predecessors to, as Dr. Rudd puts it, move PRC domestic politics sharply to the left and national security and foreign policy issues sharply to the right within that political context which he explains. This has set the stage for an extremely, I would say, ambitious and assertive national security and foreign policy posture, which involves firm positions and the seeking of geopolitical advantage. Russia plays a vital role in what I think is Xi Jinping's vision here, because it is a key geopolitical partner in many important dimensions. Now, as many others have written and observed, relations between Moscow and Beijing have evolved tremendously over the past century plus, involving a variety of extremely different, if not almost diametrically opposed positions. So I think when we look to the very long run, where things become less and less clear, the parameter of possible relations between China and Russia grows very wide. However, for the foreseeable future, the next few years in which the current autocratic, personalist strongmen of the present are fairly likely to still be in charge in Beijing and Moscow, respectively, I think it's unlikely that the relationship will change very significantly, regardless of what other major countries do in their policies, or regardless of what other structural events may transpire. And I look forward to discussion on that.
I'm just going to follow up with one quick question before I ask my the other panelists to jump in here.
Please.
We've touched on in this event in the past before, right? This term friendship without limits. But even if there are no limits, there are still parameters. So I just wanted to ask you if you could sort of explain to the audience a little bit, how do you see this sort of friendship without limits?
Absolutely. Obviously, there are some parameters to the relationship. I think China under Xi Jinping has been careful to try to claim that it is not directly supporting Russia militarily in its war against Ukraine, in contrast, for example, to North Korea's direct contribution of more than 10,000 troops. However, there is still very much that is going on there, and a key example in that very same dimension is the very significant support that China is providing in terms of dual-use items, advanced microchips, and other things that are essential for Russia's continued prosecution of the war in Ukraine. So China is trying to a complex tightrope act to preserve some of its rhetorical principles, but the actual facts on the ground show a very substantive, if not unlimited, partnership between the two countries.
So, Emily, let me ask you to build on that and your assessment of China-Russia relationships circa 2025.
I'll speak up. So I'm going to have to give the same disclaimer as Andrew. These views are my own. They do not represent that of any institution that I'm affiliated with, especially not the U.S. government. Keeping that as a basis, I'm going to bring up the Trump administration just as a way to sort of frame my remarks. So we've seen extremely rapid developments over the past several weeks in terms of the Trump administration's rebuke of Ukraine and overtures towards Moscow. And I say this only to say that as much as the U.S. would maybe like to pursue a reset for various reasons, my belief is that Russia will not alter its relationship with China, North Korea, or Iran, regardless of what the U.S. does, right? Because, of course, if Moscow could pursue a quote-unquote good relationship with the U.S., it will do so as long as it's interested to do so. But the level of institutionalization of the relationship, particularly between China and Russia, and particularly over the last 4 years, is so high that it's just going to be really, really hard to disentangle. And second to that, there's just, as a bottom line, such a deep, deep mistrust of U.S. interests and motivations inside every level of the Russian government and the regime that it's going to be very hard to disentangle from. But one really interesting thing about alliances that I think is quite interesting to note vis-a-vis China and Russia is that alliances have always been sort of America's force multiplier, say, right? And what we see now is we see actually as the U.S. move away from alliances, we are seeing deeper and deeper institutionalization of a quote-unquote friendship or alliance between China and Russia. So actually right now we have these joint naval exercises that are going on in the Middle East right now between China, Russia, and Iran as part of the, I believe it's called the Security Belt 2025. But I think it's also important not to overstate the relationship. So these states are far from a coherent bloc, right, that the U.S. could orient an effective strategy towards. There is an interest-based alignment, it's a material-based alliance, but it's not a cohesive bloc. So, for example, it doesn't resemble anything like the Warsaw Pact in the Cold War, right? So it's a fundamentally sort of different set of interests. And therefore, the cooperation that exists between these states does not really resemble at all what the level of interest in terms of political, economic, diplomatic, or technological cooperation that exists, or let's just say existed, between the U.S. and its European allies. It's fundamentally very different. Nevertheless, we do see cooperation across a host of issues, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as the talk moves on, particularly in economic and increasingly in sort of military and technological cooperation. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Professor Kozyrev, if I switch over to you, we've touched on sort of the view from Beijing of this relationship. If we are looking at this from the viewpoint of Moscow, right, how does this relationship look today, and has it shifted at all given the events over the last year, both in terms of what's happened on the ground, but also, as was alluded to, right, with the new U.S. administration and so on and so forth?
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Since the turn of the centuries, Russia had, under Putin, with the Putin administration, had been seeking for some sort of alignment or for some sort of arrangement, a deal with the West, especially with the United States, to create probably a new Yalta, or a new type of arrangement, which we associate usually with the spheres of influence, hoping that the United States, especially after 9/11, when Putin actually supported the U.S. administration, the Bush administration, hoping that the United States would actually make some concessions and get to some deals in terms of acknowledging Russia's position, role in Eurasia, and as well as acknowledging China's role in the New World, right? And we all remember China's attempts to assure the international community that China's rise would be peaceful. We all remember the ideas of the Putin administration to, set up some sort of collective leadership, which we usually associate with the concept of the great powers, and that happened just before the events in the Arab Spring and events on the Bolotnaya Square in Moscow. So their concern, the re-elected Putin administration when he went to his third term, and also the beginning of the term of Xi Jinping as president, kind of was coincidence with the Arab Spring and its consequences. Especially China and Russia felt very betrayed by the violation of the UN Security Council resolution 1937, I think, on a no-fly zone in Libya, and after the collapse of the Libyan regime, and especially after certain American politicians kind of hinted that after Gaddafi, Putin would be the next, and after the Bolotnaya Square in Moscow, the protests, and the developments in U.S.-China relations, especially during the Obama administration, when China felt that the Obama administration started to realize its pivot to Asia, and it tried to squeeze China away by changing the trade rules and institutional, foundations of the Asia-Pacific order, and that actually brought those two regimes, Moscow and Beijing, together, and they started to develop a new, a sort of new type of relationship. It's that the Chinese call it. We are seeking the new type of great power relationship, and the Russia-China relations actually manifested like it was the implementation of this new type of the great power relationship, or relationship between the great powers. And then they, especially the first sign was the first Ukraine crisis, the siege of Crimea, in 1914, when China openly didn't support this because for obvious reasons, for the violation of territorial integrity and some other important UN principles, but China started kind of tacitly provide some support of Russian and especially Russian economy in the period of the first waves of sanctions from the West, and then by 2019, the new formula of a specific type of the partnership, which they called better than an alliance, was formed. What is better than an alliance? Or we just speak about this no limit of friendship. I think that this is the way how the two parties have probably taken or embraced the idea of strategic ambiguity. We all have been talking about strategic ambiguity of the United States toward the Taiwan issue. But here, I think China and Russia have been talking about strategic ambiguity, opening the ways for improving or making this alliance more rigid and more like treaty-based with more defense provisions, or just to making this alliance a little bit loose, if in case the United States and the West turn to negotiations with both China and Russia to strike this deal on equal footage. So I believe that whatever China and Russia have been fighting against or confronting in terms of the idea of a post-sovereign world based on the neoliberal globalization principles very much resonate now with the current Trump administration, whatever they are doing. That's why there's such an excitement of the Trump administration's return to negotiations with Russia.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Dr. Lee, I'm going to draw you into this conversation and also draw North Korea into this conversation. I think a year ago at this event, if you had said, right, we'd see over 10,000 North Korean troops deployed to the theater, people would have perhaps been surprised at that assessment, but that's certainly what we have seen. Why did this happen? And has this in any way shifted or deepened, right? Sort of the cooperation. It's always been an interesting cooperation amongst the three players, right? There's the DPRK-Russia relationship, there's the DPRK-PRC relationship, and then, right, there's the relationship we've just been talking about, right, between Russia and China itself. How has the sort of introduction of North Korea in terms of actually willing to commit its young men to the battlefield at Russia's behest changed or shifted, right, perceptions about the nature of this three-way relationship? And why is it happening?
Well, thank you, Mark. I think some of us coming to this issue with some personal historical baggage, particularly marking the third anniversary of the Ukraine-Russia war, because for many Koreans, it reminds us of our own Korean War, which was a proxy war between the two major powers at the time. And given the civilian casualties on a daily basis in Ukraine, there is a huge South Korean public sympathy toward Ukraine. And coming back to your question, actually I attended many conferences, but when it comes to North Korea's involvement in this Russian-Ukraine war, and that they asked me many details, but they never asked me the question about why. So I was surprised that this should have been the first fundamental question. They ask how many North Koreans are there, how many casualties there, what kind of weapons they provide. But I was never asked to present why North Koreans are there. So I was refreshingly alarmed by your question, and also very pleasantly surprised that we should have tackled this question from the very beginning. And actually, it goes back to the earlier discussion that I was engaged in many conferences in Washington, that they seemingly underestimated that this emerging relationship between Russia and North Korea, come on, it's just transactional. Nothing significant will come out from here. We don't have to write a paper. We don't have to write talking points about this. This will just fade away. But after 2.5 years, North Korea, Russia, through the Russia-Ukraine war, they developed their mutual relationship in a very rapid manner, so much so that they established formal mutual defense treaty in June 2024, which commits both sides to immediately provide military aid to each other. And it's an obligation. And the North Korea's perspective, in the world, it has only another such mutual defense treaty, that is China in 1961. So now North Korea has 2 mutual defense treaties in the world with China and Russia. And kind of it forms the natural triangular, this trilateral relationship, which is very much reminiscent of again, the Korean War. During the Korean War, North Korea, China, and Russia on the one hand, on side, and US and its allies and South Korea on the other side. So there's a lot of discussions about whether this is not necessarily a new Cold War, but a lot of resemblance of a Cold War. I think the debate still goes on. And I think that you also earlier asked about the China-Russia relations, but then I think their focus is, from China-Russia's perspective, their focus is actually on United States. And from China's perspective, they, at this moment in their, I think they want some privacy from competition with the United States, so that they focus on a lot of domestic laundry issues, particularly to reclaim its economy, so that it get better ready to compete again with the United States. And here, from China's perspective, the ongoing, Russia, North Korea, this relationship is not something to be jealous about. Rather, I think that it's, from Chinese perspective, in its ideological competition with the United States, it serves a larger purpose of rivalry with the United States, while Russia serving more like outsourcing what China is supposed to do when it comes to North Korea. Because in the past, China used to provide a lot of economic aid and security support to North Korea, but then now Russia is actually playing the role. So in a way that China could hide from the Washington's radar what China is doing again with North Korea, what China is helping North Korea. But then China just kind of step back, and Russia is doing all the song and dance that China is showing this so-called pro pro-Russian neutrality when it comes to in the Ukraine-Russian war. And just looking forward, I think that this what come out to be we thought as a transactional relationship between North Korea and China relations. I think it's here to stay for a considerable period of time because North Korea, China, and Russia, all of them have this ideological tendency and orientation that their common and bigger enemy is the United States. And I think they have a lot more to cooperate, a lot more things in common than to be divided by, among themselves. Particularly, finally, I think that if current Trump administration strategy is to divide China and Russia, I think this goal is very difficult to be achieved because of the reasons that I just mentioned. I'll just stop here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. I just want to ask if anyone else wants to comment on North Korea and how its much more active role in the conflict in Ukraine upends or changes the dynamic.
Oh, let me just add that one of the benefits of North Korea, real benefit, substantial benefit, is that since the Korean War, North Korean soldiers had never been abroad. This is for the first time since the Korean War, North Korean troops have been deployed abroad in real warfare, and they are learning how to deal with modern warfare, particularly the importance of drones. They're beginning to realize that drone plays a very important role, and the casualties they mentioned, North Korean soldiers, about 3,000 North Koreans or 4,000 North Koreans died. From Kim Jong-un's perspective, probably that's not the major concern, because Kim Jong-un just immediately resupplied 3,000 soldiers to Russian frontier again. So North Korea is learning a new tactics and strategy of modern warfare is something that North Korea could deploy. And when it comes to inter-Korean crisis, for example, North Korea could use drone, how they can use drone to attack South Korea and U.S. Military bases in South Korea as well.
Amazing. Okay, so I agree with the point that, with Dr. Lee's point that it's a very interesting combination of dynamics in terms of China-Russia, North Korea relationship. So I would even assume that this deal, the treaty or pact, defense pact between Moscow and Pyongyang of 2024 was a sort of probably the result of these dynamics. In terms of China's pro-Russian neutrality, I believe that signing a treaty or just reviving this defense alliance relationship with Pyongyang, Russia kind of helped China at certain point to being not directly exposed in its relationship with the United States, since many analysts in Russia actually believe that the United States had been using the North Korea nuclear issue or denuclearization issue as a tool, instrumental or bargaining chip in its relationship and exerting more pressure on China. So now Russia kind of rescued China of this burden to a certain extent by signing this a special treaty with Pyongyang. And also I liked the idea of some of the military analysts from Russia who said that actually it was a new reading of nuclear deterrence, because what happened, and I myself invented the term which is called complementary deterrence, which actually emerged during this the 3 years of the Russia-Ukraine war, when everybody was talking about Putin's ability to use nuclear weapons, but his psychological inability to actually apply this. So and then there were a lot of conversations, if you all remember, in a year ago about the kind of how to actually reassure Western powers in terms of Russia's ability to use nuclear weapons in case the third party is interfere into the Russia-Ukraine war, and in case of an attack from someone on the Russian troops. And then there were lots of doubts in the West that actually Russia would be able to do this. So by signing this treaty with the so-called irrational Kim Jong-un, who is considered to be a kind of who has been playing a madman kind of theory, personality approach. Probably it was Russia now has added to its deterrence system as a complementary deterrence, this psychological deterrence component. So, and for Kim is also a component which is I would say, even make Kim more kind of restrained, self-restrained in terms of his provocations in the Sea of Japan or against South Korea. So what I would like to say is that probably this formalization of these relationships and the formation of the complementary deterrence mechanism, which enables Putin to to keep the options open in terms of nuclear, application of nuclear weapons, and for Kim to be a little bit sleep better and be safe in terms of being backed up by the much more potential in terms of material resources, Russia, and nuclear potential Russia. So that might really even create some sort of more order than chaos on the Korean Peninsula. That's my point.
I think the North Korean troops in Ukraine is actually really important because we sit here and we primarily talk at the strategic level, right? So we're talking about Putin and Kim and Xi, but actually the North Korean troops is really significant because that is at the operational level. And when you do anything like troop exercises or you have troops engaging in actual conflict, that is literal people getting together and working together. And that's quite significant when you look at sort of the larger picture of relations. Because person-to-person contacts, learning to fight against each other or with each other or using the same systems, that really adds a level of integration into the relationship that really adds some cement to it, right? So when you sign treaties, that's only at the most elite levels of government. But when you're actually bringing troops together and having them fight together, you're creating these relationships that outlast probably the conflict, right? So one of the things that we've talked about in the Cold War or even now in the state of U.S.-Russia relations is that there's basically no person-to-person conflicts. And that has a very long-lasting effect, right? So when you do have person-to-person contacts, that also has a long-lasting effect. Those people will remember working alongside the Russians, right? Or working alongside the Chinese or doing an exercise together. And those relationships get institutionalized. And you see as they sort of, perhaps rise in rank in the military, or rise in rank in the foreign service or whatever, you have these person-to-person contacts that you can then draw upon later in life. And those are really quite significant, and that's been sort of a problem that we have been identifying in the state of U.S.-Russia relations for a while, is that those contacts are done. And so when you go 20 years down the road, you won't have anybody that knows each other, right? But now, Russia and North Korea are establishing those person-to-person contacts, right? And so that's going to be very significant in the long term. In the medium and the long term. And so I think that people say, oh, it's 10,000 troops, it's not a big deal. I think that's completely false. I think it's a really, really consequential thing for the state of Russia and North Korean relations.
Two-finger intervention. I think this is a very important point that I missed in my earlier comment that in South Korea now they are discussing what's the meaning of this 3,000 or 4,000 North Korean soldiers died actually in Russia. When it comes to describing China-North Korea relations, it's an alliance soaked in blood. Now, North Korea-Russia relationship is also becoming an alliance soaked in blood. And even though it started as a transactional relationship, when, going back to the Bible, there is no greater friendship than, dying for your friend. Actually, North Korea, in a way, died for Russian friends. And I think that Putin, even though however a person he might be, he feels obligated, indebted to North Korea, and Putin is willing to provide economic aid. For example, North Korean workers are in Russia a lot more than before. Russia provides tourist visa, the student visa, and also North Korea wants satellite precision technology from Russia. North Korea also wants nuclear submarine technology from Russia, which Putin also mentioned that Putin is willing to consider this space technology and the submarine technology as well. So I think that this friendship will outlast this war and very possibility of something that we need to deal with in the future as well.
So let me ask you to elaborate a little bit more on particularly sort of the economic dual use technology elements of this relationship, right? Dr. Lee, you've hinted at, right, one way this runs is from Russia to North Korea almost getting not just a new economic lifeline, but also much of the technology that it's always sought. And to some extent, Beijing has been perhaps more reluctant to provide than Moscow is providing here. At the same time, we all know that the Russian economy has been able to withstand sanctions, in part because China has been such a buttress here, and in part because then that gives cover to lots of other economies, right, in order to act on that front as well. So I just wanted to invite you to touch a little bit more about the nature of this economic technology relationship that we're seeing. Is it as robust, even more robust than we saw at the beginning of the war? Does this really sort of pose real questions as to what the future of Western aligned sanctions policy ought to be? Any reflections and thoughts on that front?
Absolutely. I think you've identified a very important area, Mark, and this speaks to the extensive strategic and very broad-based and strong nature of the partnership between China and Russia that I think will not go away anytime soon. And it's much stronger than it was when Putin invaded Ukraine a little over 3 years ago. At that point, Russia had very advantageous market coverage in terms of exporting energy to Europe, and a lot of that is no longer possible for Russia. So Russia's had to reorient to China. China's benefited tremendously from these extensive energy and other resources on very advantageous terms. So there's a huge resource and economic basis to this relationship. And it's mutually beneficial, going beyond Russia, even going beyond Russia being a friend in need, if you will. As I alluded to before, China's provided very extensive dual-use technologies to Russia that Russia has tremendous, exquisite strengths in advanced, certain advanced military technologies. It still has several areas of crown jewel technologies that China has not yet fully mastered, particularly concerning nuclear submarine propulsion and other aspects of submarines, where Russia has some of the world's greatest capabilities and China does not fully yet. But in terms of some of Russia's greatest strategic technological weaknesses overlap or are adjacent to the commercial sector in terms of advanced microchips and things like that. And that's where China has been a vital lifeline to Russia's war effort in Ukraine. The provision of those technologies has been extremely extensive and really vital for Russia. So what's developed here is something that's far broader and deeper than existed a little over 3 years ago at the outbreak of whatever you want to call it in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war. You can look further back to 2014 and earlier, but in terms of the 2022 invasion. And I think it's so important for both Putin and Xi that I don't see this being severely dialed back as long as both of them are in power.
I completely agree with what Andrew just said. I mean, there is just such a material alignment between the two, and the extent of the economic relationship since the start of the war has just absolutely proliferated in terms of, the share of China in the Russian stock market and, of course, energy. But really the relationship is, first of all, it's been driven, of course, by Western sanctions, but it's also still in the context of Western sanctions, right? So until very recently, the Biden administration kept putting down new sanctions that affected the relationship. So that actually did lead to some cracks and some disappointment. So at the outset of the war, we pretty much knew that Chinese investment in Russian energy systems was going to go way up. And of course it did. There is a very big Arctic LNG project that Beijing invested in. Two Chinese major oil companies invested in 2019, immediately becoming the largest investor. But in December 23, both Chinese companies actually pulled out because of responses to tightenings of U.S. sanctions. And then this continued through 2022 and 2023 when Novatek had to basically pull out some orders because they had some difficulty sort of fulfilling things because of sanctions that were imposed just recently in January, but in the final days of the Biden administration. So that has brought some further cooperation to a halt. Now, of course, there are still projects that are trying to go ahead, but they've been slowed down and stymied by progressive sanctions from the West. Now, we don't really know what's going to happen under this new administration in terms of if they will continue the sanctions regime or if they'll pull it back. But despite these sort of little hiccups in China pulling out of what we thought would be significant investments, there's really no going back for the Russia-Western economic relationship. And I've had people come up to me recently and say, does the new reality mean that Russia will bring all its oil and gas back to Europe? No, it will send some, but it's the orientation of its raw materials is firmly towards premium Asian markets now, and it will stay that way just due to dynamics of the global energy markets, regardless of sanctions.
I think when it comes to dual use, China's practice is so interesting. For example, probably, Mark, when you are in the government, that during the heyday of US-China relations or better romantic period, China even volunteered to show to Washington, I think it was about 189 entity list of dual use purposes, and show this is what Washington did not ask China to show that, but China volunteered to show that, I'm sincere to you, I'm cooperating with you on the North Korean nuclear issue. But this time, when it comes to Russia-Ukraine war, China is taking advantage of exactly the dual-use purpose entity list as a kind of bypass the international radar and sanctions, semiconductors, engine parts, missile parts, drone parts. China is providing a lot bypassing through the third country as well. So it's very interesting how China is taking advantage of a dual use this vocabulary in a sense.
Okay, so I would probably look at this a little bit from a little bit broader perspective. It's China is not as much exposed to Western sanctions so far. So China doesn't want to really suffer from Western sanctions. So for China to support directly or indirectly some sort of the formation of, I call this integration alliance between Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, and Belarus. So I think we need to talk about a broader, I would say even probably some sort of the new alternative Eurasia-based integration alliance with the new division of labor between those countries which are more exposed to sanctions, such as China, such as Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and Belarus. They could do more because they could collaborate without having any fear that more sanctions would be imposed. China is not happy about secondary sanctions, but China could actually provide some tacitly technologies, logistics, maybe some materials, and maybe in this case collaborate with both Russia and North Korea with regard to development of new technologies or new, including military technologies, right? We have heard, Andrew just mentioned that there is a new Russia's nuclear submarine technologies, and I just read yesterday the news that Kim is very proud to develop a nuclear submarine. Mm-hmm. right? So that means that, okay, we need to watch actually who is providing technologies here, right? And what type of technologies? Is it some sort of reciprocity from Russia to actually help the North Koreans to develop nuclear submarine? How about the satellite collaboration in outer space, right? So we have examples when, for example, Belarus, I've heard from Ukrainian sources that Belarus businessmen establish companies in Shenzhen, and these companies purchase some optics from Japan, and then they supply to Belarus, and they are producing some equipment for the modernization of the tanks and artillery in Russia. So this is just exactly the new type of production line, which I would say, I remember Li Keqiang used to say production capacity network. So I think that we are looking at a new alternative production capacity network. And a few people really, like in Russia and Belarus, are talking and even mentioning sanctions against North Korea. So they acknowledge that actually we don't want to talk about denuclearization of North Korea anymore. And I'm wondering if the Trump administration is actually kind of tacitly supportive of this point, that the Trump administration is indirectly probably already has acknowledged or recognized that North Korea is a nuclear power, right? So, and secondly is like we, as one expert in Russia, whose name is Vladislav Shurigin, as a military expert, who said that, North Korea could become a kind of a dark chamber, and we could do whatever we like because there is a lack of access by intelligence, or foreign intelligence, Western intelligence. They could only look from the out, like using satellite, but whatever is going on in the underground, nobody knows. And Russia, Belarus, Iran, and China might be using this huge production capacity of North Korean workforce for producing new technologies.
All right, so before I open it up to questions, I just want to ask the panelists, right, a couple of really interesting new points inserted here in the conversation. Anything else you want to throw out on the table of things that you're observing, you're seeing about this trilateral relationship before we open up to questions?
I think there is a joke, probably not a joke, yes, probably a joke in Seoul that if Trump relies on and deepens romance with Putin, when Trump's expressed multiple times that he wants to meet with Kim Jong-un, and probably Putin could play the role of a mediator. This is a very interesting concept. In that case, whether Putin could play an honest broker, or Putin could go behind the scenes and talk with Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, and the three of them plan things out, come up with a scenario, and offer that to Trump. This is how North Korea's nuclear program negotiation should proceed. And Trump would take it, but then it's not a North Korea's idea alone. Actually, it is an idea from the trilateral, this new alliance coming from that part of the corner.
I just want to raise one sort of new issue. It was mentioned before, but I just came back from a year-long secondment at NATO where I was the deputy political advisor for a new center on protecting critical undersea infrastructure. So one of the things that we worked on there a lot was looking at potential new cooperation between China and Russia in hybrid conflict. So I don't know if people have seen this, but there were two more than two, but two really big high-profile incidents that occurred recently. So the New Polar Bear is a Chinese vessel, was a Hong Kong flying vessel actually, that dragged its anchor for several hundred nautical miles, which I'll tell you is very unusual, right? Extremely unusual to do that. The ship pled poor seamanship. It would be very, very poor seamanship indeed to have that be a real excuse. And that actually damaged the Baltic Connector natural gas pipeline. Then in December, the Yipeng 3, which was a Chinese bulk carrier that damaged two fiber optic cables, one connecting Finland and Germany, and the other connecting Sweden to Lithuania. And this ship had actually just left a Russian port. And I'm speaking all from public information, this came from newspapers, that when that vessel was boarded, they found quite a bit of kind of high-profile Russian goods in the possession of the captain. Very fancy Russian vodka, some very fancy caviar, some other sort of gifts like that. So there's no, one of the problems with hybrid conflict in general is it's very, very hard to attribute, right? So a ship can drag its anchor and say, oops, it was an accident. And it's very hard to say, no, you had malicious intent, right? Even if you're able to track the AIS and you're looking at the satellite data and all these things, it's really hard to say, no, you broke the rules. So again, it's very hard to say this was deliberate sabotage and cooperation on behalf of the Chinese and Russians. But if you look at sort of the larger picture of evidence, one reasonable assumption might be that they're working together now in sort of new hybrid ways to undermine security in Europe.
Okay, I'd like to just draw our audience's attention to one very important point. I think that the master plan of Russia and China at the current stage is to promote that new initiative that was voiced by Lavrov and Putin some time ago, which is called the Eurasian Security Architecture Initiative. So that, to me, like it reminds Xi Jinping's 2014 initiative within the SICA format, about which actually Kurt Campbell labeled as like Asia for the Asians, and that was the response from the United States to promote the integrated deterrence mechanism in the Asia Pacific, and then developed into the Indo-Pacific strategy. So what is going on now is like an attempt to alternate the transatlantic security architecture by replacing this transatlantic security architecture that China and Russia try to assure their other neighbors in Eurasia that this transatlantic security architecture has only brought chaos and the wars and conflicts in Eurasia. So they try to say, hey, just you can get along with us and you can arrange with us about the certain principles, and that would include the European partners, with the hope that Europe will start negotiating with Russia and China, and also including their hub and spoke allies in the Asia Pacific, including South Korea and Japan, inviting them, let alone the ASEAN countries, inviting them into that dialogue. And hence, the role of the North Korean agency is absolutely important here. So they look at the new kind of involvement of the North Korean potential, and North Korea as the subject in international relations in East Asia as an important node within this new future potential Eurasian security architecture, which some people call as the Eurasia for the Eurasians. So we'll need to sit and look into this.
Lots of very important dynamics in flux here. And I'm glad Emily mentioned undersea cables. I think most people don't understand just how reliant we are on undersea cables. There's a misperception among many that with our phones and electronic devices, they somehow go up into a cloud in the sky, when in fact, more than 97% of global data flows go by undersea cables, which are extremely vulnerable, whether it's to undersea earthquakes and other issues or actual malicious activity. And here's where I think among some of the different countries we've been talking about, there's a possibility of further strategic technological cooperation in various ways that could be very, very potent. One other reading I would recommend besides Kevin Rudd's book on Xi Jinping, there's a recent article called Neither Fish Nor Fowl by Dr. Sarah Kirchberger and Captain Chris Carlson, who's retired now. It's at cimsec.org. And it attempts to understand what happened with these. We have news reports of a so-called Type 041 PRC submarine having some sort of accident sinking at the pier. But what was that all about? And they make what I think is a very compelling case that it's not a showstopper, it's a speed bump in an attempt to develop what for China would be a new type of submarine with a micronuclear reactor. This could be the type of naval platform that would be ideal for interfering with undersea cables. Here, Russia has some of the world's most specialized platforms of this type. With a micronuclear reactor, you can't go very fast, but you can go very quietly for various types of exquisite undersea operations. So it seems that China may be trying to enter this area. And I can't remember all the fascinating architectures and terms and networks that Vitaly was talking about, but I could imagine strategic efforts like this involving not just China and Russia, but perhaps even North Korea. And given the potential impacts, I think that would be something of great concern, and from my perspective, and certainly something to watch very closely.
All right, well, thank you all. We have a little over half an hour for questions. So just want to ask, if you do have a question, please raise your hand. The rule here is you need to identify yourself before you ask your question as well. So we'll start with this gentleman here.
Thanks. Thank you guys for a very interesting panel discussion. My name is John Paul. I work over at the Belfer Center. You all made this point in some sense, but I'm curious about this idea of the reverse Kissinger. I think that it's fantasy, and you all seem to think that as well. And so best I can understand it, it seems to be some sort of strategic blunder by them to bother to do what I see as reassurance signaling. So my question basically is, what do you see as the purpose of Putin's reassurance signaling on this matter? Best I can figure it, there's some, like during the conversation, I can imagine that she is saying something to the effect of, I'm aware that, policy people in your government, that think tankers in Russia don't like how strategically reliant Russia is on China, and so we feel like you should reassure us and basically solve an information problem in your authoritarian regime and convince people who work for you that you're not going to pull away from China in order to seek a deepened partnership with the United States as a replacement for that. But I guess, my overall question is, how do you guys figure this, that choice to do the reassurance at all? Because it seems far more effective to let the United States continue to do its appeasement, basically offer whatever concessions it will offer, and then continue to be as close of an alliance, as you were going to be with China beforehand.
First of all, when Nixon and Kissinger tried to play first China card, was a very bad relationship between China and the Soviet Union. So that there was absolutely a great situation for the United States to utilize and capitalize on this. But yes, there are some circles in Russia, and they voice their kind of concerns about overdependency on China, and that's absolutely. But I would I've been observing China's behavior and China's gestures toward Russia, despite the real economic kind of engagement of Russia, and Russia becoming a very kind of junior partner of China economically. At the same time, China's delicate attitudes toward Russia, because they know that Russians are very vulnerable, and they just are very sensitive in terms of being too much involved, or being cornered by China in a certain decision-making process. So China has been very persistent and consistent in terms of enabling Russia to develop ties with other nations. For example, Russia prior to the war in Ukraine had been playing the Japan card. So Russia has been very active in Southeast Asia, and Russia continues to be active. That's why China, I think, that has been very adamant in terms of promoting different groupings, multilateral groupings, where Russia and China would look like they're equal, especially BRICS Plus, and it has been kind of a success of the formation, as Fyodor Lukyanov, who is very famous, a Russian analyst, calls the new ecosystem in Eurasia, where and Lavrov says that this is the international organization a la carte. So whoever wants to join, whoever wants to take, you want to take dessert, you just take dessert. You want to take soup, you take soup. So that's countries which are unhappy with this very framed and institutionalized Western systems, Western multilateral institutions. They're joining BRICS Plus, and they have a kind of, it's kind of free conversation and exchange of views, and also the venue where they could actually somehow, coordinate the interests, the national interests. And but most important is to somehow, dismiss the post-sovereign institutions and post-sovereign norms, which had been established prior to this. And actually, there is a lot of work in terms of intellectually among philosophers in ideologues to redesign and kind of reassert what actually the UN basic principles are. Because if you speak about, for example, the non-interference principle or self-determination principle, right? So in the borderless world of neoliberal globalization, these principles had been already kind of abused. So that's what they're trying to actually reassert, reestablish. And that also creates some sort of ideological, probably foundation or ground for their cooperation. And as I said, just they try to, take into account each other's interests. But my concern, most concern, is that it's because it's very personalized. It's based on Putin chemistry. All right. So what if something happens to President Putin or something happens to President Xi? What will happen next? So somehow they are thinking now how to institutionalize and formalize so that this type of relationship would persist.
Any other questions? Maybe, okay.
Thank you. Okay. Eva from Asia Center. When you mentioned about the undersea cable, are you aware, like this year, January and February, that the undersea cable around Taiwan, like in Keelung and Penghu, were damaged by so-called cargo? Indeed, that the Taiwanese government believe it's a Chinese cargo, even though it's registered in the foreign country. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. There's clearly a lot going on, and it would be an amazing coincidence if all of these cable disruptions were caused by inadvertent anchor drags. The part of the problem is, by their very nature, these undersea cables are highly vulnerable. I've been, for example, out in the Matsu archipelago, and you talk to local people, you realize just how reliant they are on these cables. There are backups, of course, but in those islands in particular, there have been a striking number of cable disruptions. So part of the reason I mentioned this in my remarks, I realize that many people are interested in geopolitics. Not everybody's interested in specific strategic technologies, but I think this is a particular case where really we are all extraordinarily reliant on undersea cables, whether we realize it or not. That extraordinary reliance is something that's very attractive to any parties that would seek to disrupt or be able to disrupt. And I agree with what I think you're implying and what Emily has said. I think there are clearly efforts already actively underway, and I worry that could get even worse in the future. It's something I'm sure we'll all be hearing a lot more about.
I just want to jump in quickly to say that I spent the last year only working on undersea cables, and 90% of all damage to cables is accidental, okay, mostly through fishing. So it is very, very difficult problem to tackle because of the variety of vulnerabilities that it faces, from accidental and otherwise. One thing that's quite interesting about the difference between the European and the Asian context is that Europe has obviously paid quite a bit of attention to this over the past few years, and it's much more it's more vulnerable in a certain sense because the Baltic Sea is very shallow, and therefore you can damage cables by anchor drags or fishing or trawling or whatever. It's a different situation in the Asia-Pacific context. Asia is also much further behind in its tackling of these issues. So over the past several months, I've been in contact with the Singaporean government and other Asian governments who are coming to folks at NATO and saying, wait a minute, how do we begin to tackle this problem? And so they're sort of learning from the missteps that Europe has made in terms of the ability to tackle these problems and the challenges that it's had. So they are paying attention, but it's just extremely, extremely difficult problem to manage at an alliance level or even at a national level. So.
And part of the related additional challenge is that, generally speaking, out to the first island chain, if you imagine going through the Japanese archipelago and Taiwan and the Philippines, so including what PRC strategists would generally call the near seas, Jinhai or Sanhai, Yellow Sea, East China Sea, South China Sea. That all is generally extremely shallow. It's only when you get past the first island chain that things get quite deep. So in some ways, this problem has similarities to the Baltic environment.
So I saw, I believe, a hand over here, and then there's a hand over there. So if you could just, we'll take this question first.
Thank you so much. It's a very interesting session. Actually, I have like one similar question to your question. But another question is I wonder if you can comment on maybe like U.S. and Russia's collaboration in the Arctic. There's some analysts and reports saying that why Trump's administration says like one of the reasons why it has this like quick shift towards Russia is that they are interested in maybe the minerals and resources in the Arctic. So I wonder if I can talk a bit about that. And I'm not sure if North Korea is also in these games or not.
And can you identify yourself?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm Alicia, and I'm a fellow host by MIT, but I also auditing classes here. Thank you.
Jump in quick and then pass it to you. So, yes, Russia is firmly committed to developing the Arctic. It laid it out in its Arctic strategy several years ago, and its economic strategy. It is all in developing the Arctic. They sort of believe that this is the key to future economic competitiveness, especially since the disruption to its energy sales post the war in Ukraine. So they have been spending for years on trying to build infrastructure, building sort of the basic safety architecture that you need to commercialize any of these things in the Arctic. And in that sense, they're way ahead of anybody in the West, right? So they have icebreakers, they have water treatment plants, they have search and rescue, all these really basic things that you need before any company can go and invest or develop anything. There are a lot of minerals there. They're very hard to get for a variety of reasons and very expensive. So when we are talking about this sort of Arctic gold rush, I'm always very circumspect on that because actually I think there's a lot of dreams that are going to be very, very hard to actually extract in reality. And we've seen that in sort of the talk about Greenland and things like that. You know, mines take 18 years to develop on average, and that's when you have full basic infrastructure and power and water treatment and all these things. There are ways that you can sort of mine for other things a little bit easier, but not in these specific mines and minerals. That said, there has been a tremendous amount of interest in China for Russians' Arctic minerals and for Arctic ASIC in general. Of course, China calls itself a near Arctic nation. But Arctic is one of the areas where we've seen some actually misalignments in Russian and Chinese interests. So there's cooperations, but there's also misalignments, right? Russia is quite jealously guarding its access to the Arctic. It believes that it is sort of the key to the Arctic, and it is in a way. And so they have been a little bit hesitant to sort of share and give open access to China in terms of all of its projects.
That's a great question. I believe that it has been, there were negotiations, as we all know, between the Russian delegation and the U.S. Marco Rubio and the others in Riyadh. Some time ago, a couple of weeks ago. And one of the issues that, because the two parties, Russia and the United States, have been looking for some sort of where the interests could overlap. And I think that the Arctic actually popped up, was mentioned as one of the area where actually the United States and Russia could collaborate. I agree with the kind of like some sort of lack of correlation between Russia's and China's approach to the freedom of navigation in Arctic. And actually, regionally, China was even closer to the U.S. position in terms of the Arctic and freedom of navigation. What I'm seeing now, observing now, is that probably China has been more kind of tilting toward Russia's interpretation and promising to actually help Russia to build those like big ports on the northern sea route. In that, and actually, Russia, there were two very important events. So Russia in 2021 confirmed that it is the Arctic that would become part of Russia's involvement into China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, because there were lots of conversations about Russia not agreeing or not being able to actually join directly the Chinese BRI. Because Russia insisted that Russia could join the BRI only if Russia comes with the Eurasian Economic Union. So it was like integration of integrations. And now the Arctic actually popped up as one of the subjects, important area for Russia-China collaboration. But next is, I think our colleague Lyle Goldstein published recently an op-ed on how actually the Arctic could become, I think it's defense priorities. One of his op-eds could become, the matter of some sort of collaboration between Russia and the United States. So because in the other areas it's problematic to actually get along, but now in this Arctic probably there is more opportunity. And finally, the very important point is that Russia is developing its own like north-south corridor, so-called, and I think that Russia wants to actually somehow connect the northern route and the north-south corridor to connect Russia's north with the Indian Ocean through Iran and Azerbaijan and Iran, and there are some new kind of logistics in terms of kind of to redesign geoeconomics of Eurasia, and probably that would be also involve some sort of collaboration between the countries, the Arctic countries, and China as well. And the United States is open. By the way, just when Dr. Lee mentioned that the greater enemy, the United States, what I believe I've observed has been both Russia and China trying to not to actually sideline the United States, yes, but invite the United States to negotiate on the equal footage, right, with China and Russia. The problem, as the Russians are saying, that the problem is the United States have been reluctant to speak with Russia on an equal foot. I mean, just as an equal partner, because we all know the legacy of the end of the Cold War and the legacy of the post-Cold War developments, and how Russia became the kind of appendage of the United States and just belonged to the US-led world. And what is going on now is like probably still Russia and China are sending signals to the United States that we can get along if you could acknowledge our equal status as great powers. Thank you.
Well, if I may chip in, I think it was 10 years ago that I wrote a paper with a Finnish scholar about the Arctic possible cooperation by 3 East Asian nations, China, Japan, and South Korea. And the question was why these countries don't cooperate each other on the Arctic when they benefit each other. And of course, there are many reasons, the historical reasons and the regional rivalry. And then it happens to be it was uploaded into the Stockholm Institute of Peace Institute, CIPRI. It became one of the most downloaded articles. I was surprised that people pay attention to Arctic, but then now Arctic really has become a hot topic these days. In a way that this shows that development of technology and great power rivalry has technology enables to explore Arctic, also deep sea, also space, and great powers are trying to expand their sphere of influence in their rivalry in a very symbolic way. And in this unsettling period, I think that in the past, China has this icebreaker Xuelong, and the South Korean scientists actually on board and cooperate joint scientific development. But then, given the current political circumstance, I think they discontinued the cooperation. Also, from South Korea's geopolitical perspective, cooperating with Russia at the time was identified as South Korea's best partner when it comes to Arctic exploration is Russia. But then, given the geopolitical tensions that South Korea-Russia potential cooperation, we need to put it on the shelf. And just going back to your question about whether it's a reverse Kissinger or reverse Nixon moment, I think that instead of Washington thinking about Plan B, how to deal with China using Russia, I think Washington doesn't have to spend time. Why don't you go back to not Plan B, but going back to Plan A? That is using the good old Washington's Asian allies, Japan and South Korea, deal with China. The alliance has been tested for the last 70 years, and Washington could make a good use of their joint military operations, special forces operations, very robust intel cooperations. And I think when it comes to dealing with Washington's perspective, dealing with China, I think Japan and South Korea, they are the best partners to deal with that instead of thinking about reverse Nixon or reverse Kissinger moment. Just stick to Plan A rather than Plan B. Okay, questions?
Thank you all. It's a very interesting session. I have a question regarding nuclear proliferation across the world, especially in East Asia. I find that there are two things going on at the same time. The first thing is Russia is helping North Korea to building a nuclear submarine and also developing some delivery capacity for missile. That's the first thing. The second thing is Trump administration is moving away from the security guarantees for its European and Asian allies, maybe like receive some money from the protection. So given those two things simultaneously, can you talk about the possibility of nuclear proliferation to countries like Poland, South Korea, and Japan? I'm really worried about that. Yeah. My name is Mao. I'm from Harvard Engine Institute. Yeah.
Nuclear. All right. Yes, there is a risk of nuclear proliferation, and in many countries, especially given the current, imbalanced nature of the existing institutions and groupings and alliances we are looking at into, especially the European remilitarization process, which actually concerns me even more. I believe that given the East Asian tradition of conflict management, probably they will find out how to actually manage and just mitigate the threats. But what I'm concerned about is that U.S. withdrawal from Europe, and how Europeans are now could be left alone, and that what they will develop nobody knows. And here comes the some ideas of deployment of French nuclear weapons in Germany, and some other ideas which are really just imbalanced, can just kind of, I would say, destroy the existing non-proliferation format and frameworks and norms. So that is a real problem, especially given the kind of very shaky status of the United Nations, and everybody now is concerned about what United Nations' role might be in this process. And we see that the United Nations has not been very much effective in different parts of the world. In Gaza today, we have the Syria situation, that there is a genocide against the Alawites and others in Syria. So, and the United Nations is still waiting and just discussing maybe, but not doing anything. So that is a real problem with this current world order. So what I believe is that what the Trump administration is trying to deliver a message that we need to actually sit and probably negotiate about the new parameters of a new world order.
Bill Gates recently interviewed CNBC, What Keeps You at Night? Bill Gates said World War III with the nuclear weapons. So a guy like Bill Gates, who makes money by building, making computers, also has to worry about nuclear weapons these days. I think it really becomes more personal in reality, that Putin also thought about contemplating using nuclear weapons against Ukraine. And I think that here, going back to North Korea, I think if Trump negotiates North Korea and North Korea is unwilling to give up its nuclear weapons, so that Trump, okay, you can have nuclear weapons, but then don't just proliferate. Keep your nuclear weapons, just don't sell or make sell other countries. That will be a very dangerous moment, because really puts other Asian allies like Japan and South Korea vulnerable. So definitely South Korea, Japan, they will decide to embark on their own indigenous nuclear weapons. And also you mentioned Poland, but also Germany is also thinking about building its own indigenous nuclear weapons these days. So I think the key is the leadership here, and Washington is the key. And what Washington does with Ukraine-Russian war, and prevents the use of nuclear weapons and prevents other allies making the decision to going nuclear, and Washington's nuclear negotiations with North Korea. I think it has a lot of implications for the rest of the world as well. So Washington is the key here.
Thank you for a fascinating discussion. I'm Mitch Presnick. I'm one of the visiting fellows at the Fairbank Center. I had a question following up on Mao's question and Dr. Kozyrev's answer from the previous one. So 40 countries participated in the core sanctions against Russia during this Ukraine war. Another 10 were part of the partial sanctions. And we see a lot of data points leading to the idea that maybe we're moving towards sort of spheres of influence world away from the previous alliances-based order. So I'm kind of wondering, what is the sort of the avant-garde, most progressive thinking within NATO and in Washington and other Western capitals about how this relationship changing needs to be addressed differently from our perspective? Thank you.
Emily, you're NATO.
Well, I don't really know how to put this. I don't know if I can say that there's a lot of progressive thinking coming out of NATO on this issue. I think if we're looking at Europe as a whole, this is a survival architecture more than anything. Is just purely how to survive, and it's not really there's not really much thinking sort of beyond sort of immediate how do we deal and cope with this particular issue. One thing I think that's quite interesting, we haven't really talked about Europe very much, is, what will happen if the US completely abandons Europe? Who will Europe turn to, right? Of course, obviously, China is a natural alternative. While there is some suspicion about Beijing in various European capitals, it is not the same sort of suspicion, for example, that you have against Russia, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there, and we've seen Beijing make huge inroads, particularly in the Balkans, for example, in terms of investments and just having a lot of political influence in general, selling 5G technology to the Serbian government. So there's been a lot of activity in terms of economic engagement there. But this does open up a huge opportunity for China if there is a more permanent schism between Washington and the U.S. And again, what we're seeing is exactly what Vitaly was talking about earlier, which is what Russia and China envisioned for the world, right? Which is a multipolar system in which various spheres of influence and great powers are treated as an equal footing. And as the Trump administration, I think it's pursuing a foreign policy that is purely interest-based and material, and perhaps not thinking about ideology or bipolarity or any of these sort of structural things that we talk about in international relations. It is moving towards the vision of China and Russia in terms of those various spheres of influence, and everything that they are doing, in my opinion, is moving towards that vision of the world.
We have a question up there, and I think this will be our last question.
Thank you for the talk. My name is Zichen Wang. I'm currently a mid-career student at Princeton University. I also run several newsletters on China. So thank you for the talk. I have two questions. One is on the China's export of dual goods to Russia. Can I ask if you are observing let's say a passive attitude where there is no vigorous checks by the country, by the state, to stop the export of dual-use goods, or is there a concentrated push by Beijing to have its state-owned enterprises and private enterprises to export to Russia to help Russia? Or do you think practically it makes no difference between the two? And my second question is to Professor Holland, and if I was listening correctly, you were saying that perhaps what has been painted over the grand visions for Arctic will not necessarily materialize. And I'm a big fan of that theory because I've been listening to too much grand theories about Arctic. And can you maybe enlighten us a bit more? Thank you.
Just with regard to dual use, this is very important for us to understand that since we've seen China's, despite all secondary sanctions, all threats by the Biden administration, all attempts to actually sanction against the Chinese firms, Chinese banks. There were lots of banks and financial institutions being sanctioned and punished by the Western, by mostly United States Department of Treasury. China continues helping Russia, and this is very important to understand how important the stability of Russia is for China, because nobody wants to see Russia disintegrating the same way as the Soviet Union had disintegrated, right? Because in China there is a clear understanding that China doesn't want to really get involved into securing its borders by sending troops to Siberia and actually fighting maybe for influence if something happens. Hopefully not. And fighting and competing with the Americans and Japanese and invading and involving, because they need to secure nuclear sites and all this stuff, and especially given the future potential clashes between the territories of Russia with each other, which are very armed, which have their own bureaucracy, own elites, who might start building their own political identities, right? So for China, it is a nightmare. So first thing. Second thing is, you all remember that how actually the Hu Jintao government, and later on the Xi Jinping government have been glorifying Putin, because contrary to the 1990s, when Russia actually was kind of an appendage of the United States, trying to implement that neoliberal model, very like typical America type, like free market, oligarchic capitalism model, which actually brought even more damage to Russia than World War II. In terms of the GDP, the shrinking of GDP. GDP actually collapsed by 40% by the end of that decade. So that was a disaster for Russia. And that's why when Putin actually came to power and started to centralize and reorganize governance, there were lots of very positive voices from China kind of appraising this, because now just the Chinese own model, which emphasizes the role of the state in state regulation, the state as the smart state, a state as being capable not only to solve domestic problems effectively, but also to actually address the external challenges effectively. That's why we're talking about the good governance and the too much, a lot, and also a Chinese model as exporting to other countries, right? So for China, it was absolutely important to see that a non-Asian country is also trying to implement something which actually the Chinese Communist Party had been cherishing for, the more centralized, more organized, with the emphasizing the importance of state regulation, and especially some sort of implementing national goals, some sort of Russian national goals and Russian patriotism and nationalism. So they started to build an image of Putin as real statesman. That what actually has happened during the Hu Jintao administration, and then later, especially during Xi Jinping administration. So now nobody wants in China, from the perspective of China's own CCP legitimacy, to actually see Putin's regime collapsing. So nobody wants this, because there will be even with a huge blow against the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party itself.
Just quickly talk about the Arctic. When you talk about commercializing the Arctic, you're talking about two things. One is shipping, right? So that's Northern Sea Route. There have been problems in the Northern Sea Route. It's just not commercially viable yet, right? So last summer, Russia sent 2 ships through. They were delayed several weeks because things get frozen. It's still as fast as our Arctic ice is melting, which it is ice melting. It's not yet commercially viable. You have to understand that when you're talking about the shipping industry, you're talking about insurance. Insurance is one of the biggest things in shipping, and right now it's just too costly to insure, and there's cheaper ways of getting things around. Now, will this become viable in the future? Probably. And Russia thinks very long term when it comes to its economic strategy, sort of much longer than we do in the West, because we tend to be guided a little bit more by more immediate concerns and term limits. But in Russia, they think very long term, so that will probably work out in the long run, and if there's cooperation and need for faster shipping routes. But the second is resources, and resources is a little bit trickier. So there's oil and gas, there's a lot of hydrocarbons in the Arctic, and they can be exploited. It's expensive, though, to exploit them, and Russia right now has a problem with capital investments into its oil and gas, so it needs a lot of capital investments into aging fields, doesn't have access to that capital because of sanctions, doesn't have access to parts, right? So that's expensive. And then the second is minerals, and the biggest concession about minerals is that people treat them like hydrocarbons, and they are not like hydrocarbons. It's a completely different market. It's not about getting the minerals. There's all kinds of minerals all over the place, right? There's minerals in Europe, there's minerals in the US, there's minerals everywhere. Whether you can extract them commercially is another matter. In Russia, you probably can eventually extract minerals, but it will not be commercially viable for quite some time because of the things I talked about earlier in terms of what you need to establish to make commercially viable projects. Secondly, the issue about minerals is not really getting them. It's about processing and refining. So all of the choke points in critical minerals is processing and refining. And one of the reasons why it's become such a national security talking point is because China has 90% of the capacity for refining and producing and smelting critical minerals. And there's actually been quite a difficult problem in getting other places to produce and refine these products and smelting because it's very dirty. Refining and processing is really dirty, smelting's really dirty. So when the Biden administration, for example, was talking about ally shoring for production and refining, well, nobody wanted to do it. It was not politically viable to establish those plants, say, in Europe. And in the US, nobody wants to do it either because nobody wants it in their district. Right, so it's not, again, it's the question of processing and refining. And actually, Russia has devoted quite significant resources to trying to understand this problem and to bring back production and refining capacity, which it lost completely after the Cold War. And they have been investing in and thinking about this. And one really interesting note that I wrote a memo recently about Russia's minerals is that they have the same concerns as the United States about China's domination of processing and refining. They're also extremely concerned about this and want to bring that capacity back to Russia.
If I could quickly mention here regarding Russia maritime strategy and policy issues, including in the Arctic, Emily's Institute, the Russia Maritime Studies Institute, has provided wonderful resources on this. They've translated many of the key Russian documents. So if you just Google Russia Maritime Studies Institute and go to their website, this is a tremendous service to all of us who do not actually speak Russian. These are very high quality translations.
I did the Arctic one, so that's up on the website now.
So I hope you'll see that we certainly have brought a wealth of expertise and information to bear here on the third anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Thank you all for all of your wonderful insights about this trilateral relationship between the DPRK, China, and Russia. And thank you all for joining us here today. Please join me in extending a round of thanks to our panelists.